Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the FAFSA line-by-line training. The training today is sponsored by the Ohio Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. My name is Morley Keller, and joining me today as a presenter is Faith Phillips from COTC OSU Newark. We want to acknowledge the Ohio Department of Higher Education, who has supported OASFA this year in providing a lot of the professional development being made available to school counselors and college access advisors and other education stakeholders. The webinar will take the full 90 minutes today. So we are going to encourage you to type all of your questions in the Q&A box. We have some additional colleagues, Kim Jefferson and Lemaster, who's with us to answer questions, because we want to make sure we get all your questions answered, and we're not sure if we try to save them all to the end if we will have time, because we've got a lot of information to cover today. So please, by all means, type your questions in the Q&A box, and you should see responses come back for your questions. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Faith Phillips, who will do the first part of the presentation, and here we go.
Thanks, Morley. Good morning, everyone. We are representing OASFA, so the four of us that are here on this webinar are volunteers of the OASFA Outreach Committee, and this presentation is being brought to you by OASFA, which is a nonprofit organization comprised of financial aid professionals throughout the state of Ohio. Our specific committee disseminates information through a variety of activities, including this training, to various stakeholders like yourself. We are providing this information to you today free of service. You do have permission to copy and distribute our materials to your students, but you may not charge a fee. If you have any questions at any point in time after this webinar related to the webinar or anything else, please feel free to email us at outreach@oasfa.org. That goes to the four committee chairs that we are monitoring on a regular basis and are happy to answer your questions and get back to you as quickly as we can. Next slide. So as Morley already mentioned, this presentation is specifically being brought to you by an initiative through the Ohio Department of Higher Education called Ohio FAFSA 22 Initiative. And it is this statewide effort. The state recognized that FAFSA completions are down throughout the state. They were last year, and they are still down for the class of 2022. So they put grants out for community organizations and school districts to apply and request to use the funds to help increase FAFSA completions. So there's been $1.7 million given to 25 groups. So we feel very blessed that we're able to bring this, this webinar to you with the support of the state. Web resources that we also are making available to you are on the OASFA website at oasfa.org, and you can go directly to the counselors page and see all of the different resources. And we are constantly updating this page. So even if you go out one day and you need something else, go out in another month or so, and you may find additional information out there. Also, this initiative is to do enhancements to the FAFSA student level tracking system, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So Ohio FAFSA numbers as of September 24th, Ohio ranked 14th in the country for FAFSA completions, which is pretty good for the class of 2021, but we're still behind the class of 2020, and 62.3% of the Ohio class of 2021 had completed a FAFSA. So we want those FAFSA numbers to go up. So we're hoping all of these different initiatives that the state is putting out there will assist us with that. But much assistance is needed if we're going to get those numbers up, which is one of the reasons why we're bringing this webinar to you today. We want to stress that we do not expect counselors and access groups to be experts in the financial aid process, nor in the FAFSA process. Our whole goal with this is to just give you the tools to answer the basic questions that students and parents may be bringing to you about the FAFSA. But we absolutely want you to refer them to a financial aid representative, or you can always email OASFA Outreach with your student specific questions. So again, we don't expect you to be experts, but we also know it helps you to have a better understanding about the questions that are in the FAFSA form. Nationally, we are, the state of Ohio, 4.2% behind the class of 2020, and only 58.8% of students have completed the FAFSA. So again, we still have some work to do with FAFSA completion. There is a tracking mechanism where you're able to track FAFSA completions for your school. So you can look at just an aggregate number and comparison options by going to formyourfuture.org FAFSA tracker. So that's just numbers and just kind of shows you where you are in comparison. But you also have the ability to get to student level data for Ohio by going to this website here on the screen. And you can compare last year versus this year. You can get down to the state, the city, the district, and even your building level. But you do need permission from your superintendent to get to this data, to get access to this data. So if you don't already have this access, when you go to this website here on the screen, you will want to reach out to your superintendent to give you the permission to see that. The 22-23 FAFSA data should be starting to show up now that the FAFSA went live in October, and many enhancements have been done this year to the Ohio site. So we're going to shift now into the entire FAFSA process. And for those of you who have not been around this process for very long, we always want to start families with requesting an FSA ID, which is the electronic signature for not only the FAFSA, but other FSA sites that they will use throughout their college experience, as well as if they borrow student loans, they will continue to use this FSA ID to track their servicers and the repayment process of their student loans. So we encourage families to go out and get their FSA IDs prior to starting the FAFSA process. At this point, it's not as important, but it is important to know that the FSA ID is not year specific. So families can request the FSA ID at any time. And once they have generated their username and password, that shouldn't have to change or adjust throughout the college experience. So the FSA ID is a username and a password that gives the student and the parent access to several FSA online systems, and it serves as a legal electronic signature. The student who is filing the FAFSA needs an FSA ID, and then only one parent whose information is on the FAFSA form will need to apply for an FSA ID. And independent students do not need a parent signature on the form. The FSA ID, again, should be requested before beginning the FAFSA. The FSA ID requires an email address and a mobile phone number. Email addresses and mobile phone numbers can only be associated with one FSA ID. So the parent and the student must use a separate email and a separate mobile phone number when applying for the FSA ID. Note that we are at the point where cell phones have been around a while now, and so cell phone numbers are being recycled. And so a parent or student may try to apply for an FSA ID using a cell phone that was already used for an FSA ID, but it's being recycled and it's now theirs. If they encounter that, they will have to call Federal Student Aid and speak to a specialist to get that realigned so that they can use the mobile phone number. Also, students should not use their high school email account to create an FSA ID. I know some schools, only the student on the school site can get those emails. You cannot get outside emails, but also they're deleted after a student graduates from high school. So the student should not be using a high school email account for the FSA ID or any admissions applications. So you can go to the FAFSA.gov or studentaid.gov. When families use FAFSA.gov now, it is redirecting them to the new Federal Student Aid website, which is studentaid.gov. So we are trying to start driving families to the studentaid.gov website. But under Apply for Aid, they can select to complete the FAFSA form. It is available in English and in Spanish. There is a paper version available for those who need it. And there is a mobile app, but I believe most families are probably still doing the FAFSA website, FAFSA on the web, which is now open. It opened October 1st. And the 22-23 FAFSA is using the 2020 federal tax form. I want to pause here just a second and go back to the FSA ID because there were a few things I wanted to make sure that I mentioned on FSA ID that's not on the slide. I mentioned that only one parent needs an FSA ID and only one student needs an FSA ID. Each student should create their own FSA ID and the parent should create their own FSA ID. And they really shouldn't share the username and password. But what I want to stress is if you're working with a family who has been locked out of their FSA ID, they will need to call federal student aid if they can't reset it. And the parent cannot call on behalf of the student and vice versa. Also, when they're putting in their mobile phone number and their email address, they are requested to verify it. And so what I mean by that is when they click verify for email address, for example, it will send an email to that email address and give them a code that they take back to the FSA ID application. And then the same thing with the mobile phone number, they'll get a text with a code to take back. I highly encourage doing both of those because if the FSA ID does become locked, most times a family can reset their own FSA ID if they have verified that email and their mobile phone number. So thanks, Morley. I'm ready to move on. You can go one more. Okay, so this is the studentaid.gov website. So if you've ever been on FAFSA.gov, it still looks similar. It's just that there's more options on the studentaid.gov website. This site has a lot of great information for students, taking them all the way through the process of just understanding financial aid, applying for aid, completing the process, and if they take out student loans, managing their student loans. So the very first time that a student and parent come to this site, they would click start here and identify the student. And then the FAFSA saves throughout the process while they're in there. And then the next time they go in, they would click log in. So if they haven't finished the FAFSA, they would log back in. If they have to go back in and correct information, add a school or view the student aid report, they would click log in. The FSA, or excuse me, the FAFSA announcements down below, those are constantly changing based on important information that FSA wants to share. So if they are experiencing any issues with the site, they will update it here. If they're going to have a planned outage because they need to do an update, as you can see, they will put it here. So it's important to look at those FAFSA announcements each time they come to the login page. So when the family identifies themselves or the student identifies themselves, they have three different ways that they can go in. They can go in as the student and they will use their username and password that they created with their FSA ID, and it will pre-populate the FAFSA form with the information, the demographic information that comes over from their FSA ID. Or the parent may log in on behalf of the student and they will need the student's social security number and date of birth in order to enter as the parent. And then the last one there is a preparer, and we're hoping to not see this used very often. We want to caution you to caution your families not to pay someone to help them through this process. That's why we're doing some basic training with counselors so that you can answer some basic questions. But anytime it's beyond your ability to answer questions, please refer them to a financial aid office or refer them through OASFA.org to us, because we don't want families paying to submit the FAFSA form or paying a preparer to do this process for them. Then once the student logs in here, they have another option. If they have not created an FSA ID, they have an option to create the FSA ID. It will take them to the FSA ID application, or they can click login to continue, and they will put in the username and password that they created for their FSA ID. And then it will pre-populate with the student's name, social security number, and date of birth. They can click on show SSN here to verify that the SSN is correct. If at any point in time a student realizes that they used the wrong social security number, they will not be able to correct it here. They would need to start all over again and start with a brand new FAFSA application. That is the best way for them to correct that information. If the student does not have a social security number because they're a citizen of trust territory, they can enter 666 in this field, and it will allow them to move forward with the FAFSA form, that at least the FAFSA can be processed and sent to the schools that they indicate, although an EFC will not be calculated without an official social security number. They would continue and they would move on. This is where they enter in their username and password, or they can put their email or mobile phone if they don't remember their username. But we always encourage them, even though we're told never to write down usernames and passwords. We've been in this process long enough to know that we all have so many usernames and passwords that it's a good idea that families write these usernames and passwords down and their security answers so that they have them each year that they log in. So they would put their username and password and they would log in here. So we're going to start talking about a dependent student that is providing parental data, because that is typically what the population is that you will be working with. So again, this is the student information screen. You can see at the top there, those are the tabs that can take you to the different screens. You can see that the first three are already checked marked, which means if the student has already answered those questions, they could skip and go to school selection, they could go to dependency status, or they could go to parent demographics, but they won't be able to go to parent financials or the next three until they've progressed throughout the process. But once they get toward the end, they can use those tabs to toggle back and forth to the sections if they want to. They don't have to keep going, previous or back. They can use, and never use the back button in the FAFSA application. So students are encouraged but not required to provide an email address. By putting an email address and a telephone number in here, they will get confirmation from their email that their FAFSA has been processed and they can log back in to view it. These three fields are not required. If you look to the right of each question box, you'll see the question mark. That is a great place to get help and assistance in all of these questions. So obviously they probably don't have too many questions about the email address, but you'll see when we get into the income section, if they're not quite sure where to find the adjusted gross income on their tax return, they hit that question mark and it will tell them exactly what line on the tax return they will find the adjusted gross income. Then the student is required to put in their address, and if they've applied for an FSA ID, all of this information will be carried forward for them. Then it will ask the student, have you lived in whatever state of residence they've listed for at least 5 years? They will answer this question. And then, are you a US citizen? And the questions are yes, the answers are yes, I am a US citizen. No, but I'm an eligible non-citizen, or no, I'm not a citizen. The first two will make the student eligible for federal financial aid. Being not a citizen and not an eligible non-citizen makes them ineligible for financial aid, but students will still want to go through the FAFSA process in some cases to have the FAFSA information provided to their schools, potentially for institutional information, institutional financial aid. Then it will ask, what is your state of legal residence? This is what determines whether or not the FAFSA results are sent to the state of Ohio, to the Ohio Department of Higher Education, to determine the student's eligibility for state of Ohio aid. So as long as the student says that they are a resident state of Ohio and they electronically sign the application, or they provide a signature on the application, that gives permission to the FSA to send the results of the FAFSA to the state of Ohio. And then we'll ask them when they became a legal resident. And again, we're still here at the citizen question. Then it will ask the student, what will your high school completion status be? Now, when they're filing the FAFSA application right now, they are still in high school. But if you read the question carefully, it will say when you begin college. And so they will say that they will have a high school diploma. And then in most cases that they're pursuing their first bachelor's degree or their first associate's degree. I received a question yesterday from a parent. It was kind of funny because it was a husband and wife that were having a discussion about whether or not the student should say first bachelor or first associate's degree, because it was one of their impressions that you had to get an associate's degree before you could get a bachelor's degree. And that's not the case. And so if the student is going to a school where they're planning to get an associate's degree first, they would just say first associate's degree. The institution in most cases will know based on the student's admission what their plan is for a degree or certificate. It will then ask what will your college grade level be when you begin the school year. And again, your seniors in high school will be saying first time, never attended. We encourage that, even though the next one is first year previously attended. And some families might say the second one that their first year previously attended because they've been doing CCP or post-secondary options. Some schools may use that to determine their students' eligibility for true freshman scholarships. And so in most cases, they will want to say, if they are in high school, they should say that they are first year, never attended. Then it will ask, are you interested in being considered for work study? And they may not know what work study is. It is, employment that they have on campus and they earn a paycheck. We encourage students to say yes to that question because many colleges will use the answer to that to determine whether or not we award work study. So if you say no to that, we won't offer you work study. And then a student may find that they really meant to say yes, or they have an opportunity to work on campus if they have work study. And by the time they go to change that answer or reach out to the college, that work study funding may have already been exhausted and the student wouldn't be eligible. So it's best to say yes to that question. It's easier to decline something than to request it later on when the funds may no longer be available to them. On the FAFSA form, if the student's answer to the question, are you male or female, is female, it will not present them with the selective service information. If they say they are male, it will explain to them that most male citizens and immigrants must register with selective service to receive federal student aid. Now, the question is on the FAFSA for 22-23, but as of July of this year, FSA said that selective service registration is no longer a requirement to be eligible for federal student aid, but they weren't able to move fast enough to get this question removed from the FAFSA form. So please know that if the student does not comply with the selective service registration, that will not impact their eligibility for federal student aid, but they do still have to go through the question on the FAFSA. The student does still have the option to say, if they say that they are not registered with the selective service, it will present them with an option to have FSA send a record over to selective service and have that student registered within 30 days of their 18th birthday. So it's still a good option for a student to comply with the selective service registration requirement, even though it's not required for federal student aid eligibility, it is still a federal requirement. And I want to point out that most schools in Ohio, especially state schools, we're required to comply with the selective service registration requirement on the registration side, even though it's no longer a requirement for federal student aid. So if a male student at a state institution, for example, doesn't comply, they may not be able to move forward with registration, or some schools will charge out-of-state or non-resident fees to the student for not complying. So keep in mind, those are two separate processes. It is no longer a requirement for federal student aid eligibility to be registered, but at most at state institutions and many other schools in Ohio, on the registration side, the student does have to document that they've complied with this requirement. We are being told that in 23-24, this question will be removed from the FAFSA form. The student is then asked to provide a driver's license number. This is not a required field, so they can put this in or move forward past this question. Then it will ask the student, are you a foster youth or were you in the foster care system? And it will ask the completion status for high school for parent 1 and parent 2. These questions are also not a requirement. We'll get questions from families that say, is parent 1 my stepdad, or which parent is it? It doesn't really matter for the most part. Then again, they could skip this question. Our understanding is that there are some states that use the answers to these questions for state aid or institutional aid. Then it will ask the student if they have ever received federal student aid. And if they say yes, it will ask if they have been convicted of possession or an illegal drug offense, essentially. This is also a question that is no longer a federal student aid eligibility requirement. So even if the student says yes to having been convicted, it will not impact their eligibility for federal student aid. This also changed earlier this year, and FSA was not able to get this question removed from the FAFSA form. So most of your students will be saying no to the question, and they won't be presented with the question that's ask if they have been convicted of a sale of illegal drugs. And we're hoping then by 23-24, this question is removed from the FAFSA form. Then it will need the student to tell us what high school they are completing. So keep in mind that it's the high school that they're in right now that they are completing. The best thing to do is really to do a search by state they can add the city or the full name of the high school and look at the search, pick their high school, and move forward with continue. So here's an example of the schools. They would just find the school where they are graduating from, select that school, and click continue. Review it, make sure that this is the school they meant to select. They can start a new search if they did not. If they cannot find their high school, they will have the ability to type in the name of their high school. Then they are prepared to tell us which colleges they would like to have their FAFSA sent to. And on the first submission of the FAFSA form, the student can list up to 10 colleges and universities. If they are applying to more than 10, hopefully by the point they come into the FAFSA form, they have researched and found out which schools have early FAFSA priority dates or deadlines. They will want to put those 10 schools on the first submission. If they provide electronic signatures, usually the FAFSA, they'll say it takes about 5 to 7 days to be processed, but usually with electronic signatures, the FAFSA is processed within about 72 hours. When they receive notification that the FAFSA has been processed, they can log back in, go to add a school, and they can add up to 10 more colleges and universities. So they can search for the colleges by state. They can type in city and name of school, but that could get dangerous if they're not exactly sure of the right city or how to spell the school. So it might be best that they go through the state search and carefully find the school that they would like the FAFSA sent to. If they are looking at a school that has branch or regional campuses, they will want to pay close attention to the options. So take, for example, the Ohio State University. The Columbus campus does all of the processing of financial aid there. So even though there are regional campuses in Newark, Lima, Marion, Mansfield, ATI, they will not find those college campuses on the drop-down list. However, Bowling Green and I believe OU, if they type in one of those schools and they're looking to attend one of the regional campuses, they would specifically select the campus that they are planning to attend. And if the student has the school's federal school code, so maybe they've received that on admissions information or on the website, they could go over to search by federal school code and type in the school code, and it would speed up the process for them in finding the school that they're looking for. Oh, there you go. Federal school code. They would just type in the school code, click search, pop up the school, and they would just be able to add it. Once they get the list of colleges, they verify, review it carefully, select the school that they want. And they will click add. And then they will see, for example, here, Howard University is brought up. For every school that they list, they have to list a housing plan. And the options are on campus, off campus, or with parent. So if they're not exactly sure at this point in time, they just need to do the best they can in selecting a housing plan that they believe that they will be using. If they realize that they've selected the wrong school, they can click over there where it says remove and go back to the search and add more schools. You can see the arrows there with the 0, 1. Once they've added more than one school, they will see the schools in the order in which they've added them. They can move those schools around if they would like in the order, but it does not really matter the order in which they list the schools. So when a FAFSA is submitted to each college, we cannot see at the college level which colleges were listed beside our school. So families get, concerned about the order in which they've listed the schools. We cannot see which schools they've listed. And if they've listed 10 and they have to go back in and add 10 more, they will have to remove a school in order to add another school. That does not tell the school that they've removed that they've been removed from the FAFSA. So every time the student makes an adjustment or a correction to a FAFSA, it creates a new transaction, and it is only sent to the schools that are listed on that transaction. So the application does save throughout the process. You cannot see it on these screenshots, but I believe up above the tabs, there is an option to manually save. And we do encourage families to occasionally go up and manually save the application just to make sure that it is saved there. The FAFSA is really belongs directly to the student. So throughout the process, you will see you and your, and it always refers to the student. And you can always look up above and it will say, you know, student marital status or parent marital status. So now we're moving into information directly related to the student and their dependency status. So the first question that helps determine whether a student is dependent or independent for financial aid purposes is, what is your marital status as of today? And we will assume in this case that the student is single and will move forward as a dependent student. So then it asks the student, do you now have, or will you have children who will receive more than half of their support from you and continue to receive that support in 22-23? So if the student filing the FAFSA form has a child of their own, they can only say yes to this question if they will provide more than 50% support for that student and continue to provide that support. If they have a child and the parents are supporting the child, they would say no to this question. Then the next question asks, do you have dependents other than a child or a spouse who live with you and who receive more than half of their support from you and will continue to receive that support? If they say yes, it would automatically make them independent. Then the next questions are not yes or no, but check boxes. And these are still dependency status questions. Are you currently serving in active duty? So a student who's in active duty or a veteran of the armed forces would check that box, would make them independent automatically. Or at any time since you turned age 13, were both of your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a dependent or ward of the court? So foster parents cannot be parents for the purposes of the FAFSA form. So if a student's an orphan or in foster care or ward of the court, they would check that box and it would automatically make them independent. Or as determined by a court in your state of legal residence, are or were you an emancipated minor? In the state of Ohio, there is not an emancipation law, so that we shouldn't see too many state of Ohio students check that box. And then the next box will ask, does someone other than your parent or step parent have legal guardianship of you? So a legal guardian also cannot be the parent on the FAFSA form. So if a student has a legal guardian, they would check that box and it would make them independent. It is important to note that legal guardianship and legal custody are two different things for the purposes of financial aid. So if someone other than a parent has legal custody of the student, they would not be able to check that box and automatically make them independent. But we'll look at other options for the student here in a second. The next question will ask, on or after July 1, were you homeless or were you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? And if they say yes to this, then it would allow them to move forward without parents' information. It is important also to note that most of these dependency filter questions, if the student says yes to that, it is likely that the school's financial aid office will reach out to them and ask for some form of documentation to support the status, just to make sure that the student answered the question properly and it should be considered independent for financial aid. So the student has said no in all of these cases to all of the questions. It will now say, based on your answers, you are determined to be dependent for financial aid and parents' information will be requested. However, it gives them another opportunity if they have special circumstances and they're unable to provide parental information. So say they are a student that was in legal custody, not guardianship, or they're a student that has been living with a family supporting them, but there's been no legal fostering or legal guardianship taken. The student could say, I'm unable to provide information and move forward through the FAFSA process without answering any of the parent questions. The FAFSA would be processed and sent to all of the schools that they've listed in the school selection section. However, it will not calculate an EFC. And the student needs to be prepared that the school will be reaching out to them to explain their circumstances and in most cases document it. And if the school warrants it, would override the student's status on the FAFSA and make them independent. We will again continue to move forward as the student has said they will provide parents information. So now we want to talk about whose information should be provided on the FAFSA form. And it is the parent that the student lived with most in the last 12 months. is who files the FAFSA form. If both parents are married and living together, they report both parents. If the parents are divorced or separated and they lived with one parent more than the other, it's the parent that they lived with most in the last 12 months. If the parents are divorced or separated, but they lived with one parent equally, they should select the parent that provided most of the financial support to them. That is the parent that should file the FAFSA form. Morley, you're gonna have to tell me, I can't see the slide numbers. So when we get to your slide where you take over, you can let me know. So we are talking now about the parent's marital status. So as of today, what is the parent's marital status? Now, if the biological, and it's only the biological, I should have said that, the biological or adoptive parents are the only parents for the purposes of the FAFSA form. And if the biological parents are divorced, and one of the parents is remarried that is filing the FAFSA form, the other parent, the step parent, becomes the other parent for the purposes of the FAFSA. And so the marital status here in this case would be referring to the biological parent that is filing the FAFSA form and the step parent. That would be their marital status and the date that they got married. So students will get confused here and will want to put the marital status of their parents, meaning their biological parents. So they need to keep in mind that it's the parent that is filing the FAFSA form and the step parent if they are remarried. So then they will select one of the parents and enter the parent's social security number, this parent's last name, first initial, their date of birth. And if they provide a parent's email address, which is not required, the parent will also get an email notification when the FAFSA has been processed. We like when families add in email addresses because not only do they receive this notification that the FAFSA has been processed, they will also receive reminders when the new FAFSA year is about to open, a reminder that they need to reapply for financial aid again, because remember, the financial aid process repeats itself every year.
Faith, I'm going to take your slide back. We have a request to repeat the information about which parent information belongs on the form. So we're going to go back to that slide and let you cover that again.
Yep, because that didn't have all the detail on there that I was hoping for. Okay, so let's talk about who is the parent for the purposes of the FAFSA form. So only a biological or adoptive parent can file a FAFSA form, not a legal guardian and not a FAFSA parent, or excuse me, foster parent. So if the student is living with both biological parents, then both biological parents' information goes on the form. Even if they are, regardless of whether they're married or unmarried, if they are living together, both biological parents' information goes on the form. If the parents are divorced or separated, the student would select the parent that they lived with most in the last 12 months to file the FAFSA form on their behalf. And if that parent is remarried, the step parent becomes the other parent for the purposes of the FAFSA form. So that's the only exception to the biological or adoptive parent rule. If the student says, I live with both of my parents equally, then they should pick the parent that provided the most financial support in the last 12 months or the last time in which support was provided. That is the parent who provides, or excuse me, who files the FAFSA form. And again, if that parent is remarried, the other parent becomes the step parent becomes the other parent for the purposes of the FAFSA form. And if the student was legally adopted, that is their parent for the purposes of the FAFSA form. And then the same information above applies. If that parent is divorced or separated, then it is the parent that they lived with most or who provided the most support if they lived with both of the parents equally. All right, thank you for that. So now they are reporting their parents' social security number, last name, first initial, date of birth, and the parent's email. And they will be picking who is parent one and who is parent two. And when they get to the signature page, if they provided two parents, they will be presented with the last four digits of the social and the date of birth, so that if they didn't remember who they selected as parent one or parent two, they are able to remember which one they have the FSA ID for. And then this is the other parent. So they would then put in the next parent's social security number. If they have said that parents are divorced, it knows to only look for one parent. So it will not present them with the screen for the other parent. Then it will ask for the state of legal residence for the parent and have they lived in that state for at least 5 years. And then it will be asking about the household for the parent of a dependent student. So it's asking how many other dependent children. So remember, the student has already been counted in the household size because they are the ones filing the FAFSA form. So now it wants to know how many other dependent children do the parents have. And so they would include anyone who will rely on the parents for more than half of their support in 22-23, or if they can answer no to all of the dependency status questions for those other dependents, they would then be able to include them here. So they would put the number in. So if you have a family of 4 with 2 parents married and there are 2 dependents, one of them is the student filing the FAFSA, then the number 1 would go in this next box. And then it will ask, how many other dependents do your parents have? So you only include parents that are dependents of the parents if they live with the student's parents and they currently receive more than half of their support and will continue to receive more than half of their support in 22-23. So just because the grandparent lives in the same household with the parent and the student doesn't necessarily mean that they get added in the how many other dependents do the parents have. They are only considered a dependent of the parent if the parents are providing more than half of their support and will continue to provide that support in 22 and 23. Next slide. So it starts adding up the household size. So this is a good opportunity for the student to verify that they've answered the question. So you'll see you is number 1 is the student, and then the number of parents, and then the other dependents and other dependent children. And so the student will want to verify that the household size is correct. And then the next question will ask, of those dependents above, how many of them will be in college in 22-23, but do not include the parents. You only include the student at the minimum. There has to be 1. And then of the other dependent children or other dependents, how many of them would be in the number in college. So the parents are not allowed to include themselves in the number in college here on the FAFSA form, even if they are in college. Now, if that parent is in college and they are filing a FAFSA for themselves, they would be able to include the student in their number in college. So now we're ready to move into the parent financials. And so I'll ask the parent, for 2020, have you completed your IRS tax return? And we are now past most, if not all, ability to extend the filing for 2020. So we're hoping here that most people will say already completed or did not file. And if they indicate that they already completed, it will ask what type of form, and it's either IRS form or it's foreign forms. And then they will say their marital status, married filing joint, married filing separate. And based on how they answer how they filed, will determine whether they are presented with the option to do the IRS data retrieval tool. So if the parents say they are married filing a separate return, they will be told that they cannot use the IRS data retrieval tool because the data retrieval tool is unable to go and pull 2 separate tax returns and plug it back into the FAFSA application. But if the student's parents said they are married filing joint, it will say applying, is easier and faster if you use the data retrieval tool. And they now have an option to either skip IRS DRT or they can proceed to the IRS data retrieval tool. So again, it's reinforcing that they have the option to use IRS data retrieval tool. It is optional. The student and parent do not have to use data retrieval tool. And this data retrieval tool is available in the student financials and the parent financials. So the parent can again say no thanks, and they can manually enter in the information off of their tax return, or they can click proceed to the IRS. When logging into the data retrieval tool, The student will need to say which parent has the FSA ID, because there is another measure of verification before they move over to the IRS section. So they will say which parent has the FSA ID. They will then enter in the parent's username and password and click continue. And then it will move them over in, and it will tell them you're leaving FAFSA, you're moving into the IRS data retrieval. It will ask them to do a verification of the parent's address that was used for the tax return, and then they will click transfer and it will move the information back over. But in this case, on this next slide, the parent has decided to move forward without using the data retrieval tool, and they're going to manually enter in the parent's adjusted gross income for 2020. So they can click in that box and type in the AGI. It does tell them right there that the amount is found on line 11 of the 1040, but there's also a question mark box there they could click if they need additional information on how to find the adjusted gross income and what they're looking for. And then they would click continue. In addition to the adjusted gross income from the tax return, the FAFSA wants to know for each parent how much they earned in 2020. So this is the information they would pull off of their W-2s, or a Schedule K Form 1065. And it tells them again right there on the FAFSA where to find this information. This won't necessarily be on their tax return. They will want to refer to their W-2s, and they want to carefully select parent 1 versus parent 2 and answer for the proper parent. And then click continue. It will then ask for the income tax from 2020, and it tells them exactly which line to go to on the 1040 to plug that number in and click continue. And then it will ask for questions about other taxable and untaxable income. And if they did data retrieval, some of this will pull over. If not, it's pre-populated with a 0, but they will need to review it. It will tell them where they can find this information. So for example, education credits, number 3 down there, the third one, it will tell them on the IRS form 1040 Schedule 3, line 3. It tells them where to find that information. If the family isn't sure that they should include student college grant and scholarships, they could click that question mark and it will give them a little bit more information about what is required there. But again, pre-populated with 0, and if their answers are 0, they can click continue and move on to the next income section. Then it will ask for additional information for the parent. Again, we're still talking about 2020, and it will want to know in 2020, how much child support did the parent pay out? Not how much did they receive, or work from co-op, or taxable earnings from need-based employment, such as work study. So these 3 questions are actually considered exclusions to the income. So if a parent reports that they have paid child support out, it reduces their income by the amount of support they paid out. If a student was working in college and receiving federal work study funds, those funds are a part of their taxable income that they're reporting on their tax return. And again, we're in the parent financials, but it's the same thing on the student financials. If the parent had work study earnings, they would report that here, and it excludes it. It doesn't hold it against them. It excludes them from the calculation of the EFC. And then they would click continue. And then it will ask for untaxed income for the parent. So did the parent receive child support in 2020? How much did they receive? And then they would go through each of these questions. Again, that third one down will tell them where to go on their W-2, which boxes to look at to determine if they had untaxable tax-deferred pensions. And they just need, it's pre-populated with 0s. They need to read each question carefully, determine if any of those apply to them. And if not, the 0s will stay there, and they click continue. Then it will ask the parent about their assets. Now we switch to as of today versus 2020, which is what the tax information was looking at. So it will ask the parent, as of today, what is your total in current cash, savings, and checking accounts. So they would add all of this information together and plug it in here. This is not an updatable field. This is not a correctable field. So we're capturing it at the point in time in which the family is submitting the FAFSA form. So if a family is telling you we're carrying a couple extra $1,000 in our savings account to pay off a few bills, they need to be able to exhaust that money before they plug in that figure, because they cannot come back and update that figure. It's captured at that point in time. Otherwise, families would be updating the asset information throughout the whole year. Then the next question we'll ask, as of today, what is your net worth, the parents, of investments, including real estate, but not the home they live in? This question mark right here is one of the best that a parent can click on, because it will tell them what is included and what is not included as an investment, so that they make sure that they don't report, for example, their 401ks here. That is not a reportable investment, but a stock or CD or savings that they have in investments would get reported here. And then as of today, do the parents have a business or an investment farm? If they have 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees, the response here would be 0. Otherwise, if they have a business or a farm with more than 100, they have to put the value here. And if they own a farm that is a family operated and they live on the farm, they don't report that here. And again, that question mark right beside the answer would tell them what's included in business and investment farm. And then they would click continue. And I will now turn it over to Morley, and she will take it from here.
Thanks, Faith. Just a reminder to all of you to type your questions that you may have in the Q&A box. They can be questions about the material being covered today, or if you have general financial aid questions, please feel free to type those in the Q&A box, and we will try to get everything answered for you as we go through. Faith took you through the parent financial section, and now we're going to move into the student financial section. And I will caution you that the questions, in a sense, are going to be identical. The difference is checking at the top, you can see how the check marks are progressing as we go through the form. And we just created just finished the parent financials, and now we're in the student financials. So one of the biggest mistakes sometimes that we see is, particularly if a parent is completing the entire form, they complete their financial information and it switches over to the student, and they don't notice that, and they feel like they're being asked to answer the same questions again, so they go back through and type their own information in a second time, which creates a really strange EFC, and oftentimes a high EFC. And, so we want you to be careful and remind your families to make sure they're paying attention to the bar graph across the top to make sure they're putting the information in there. So it's going to ask first about the students' tax status for 2020. If they filed a tax return, they would put already completed. Oftentimes, this is a Dropbox question. Oftentimes for students, if they were not working or they worked and only earned a few dollars, they may be checking not going to file. If they did, though, it is going to ask what type of form, so the 1040, and then what was your tax filing status. For a student, very often using this Dropbox, it would be a single. The student would be filing as a single person. So we want to get the tax filing status in there correctly for the student. And then if they have completed the form, they are going to get an option, just like the parents did, to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So if they want to do that, they can click to proceed to the IRS. Otherwise, there's an option there at the bottom to skip the DRT and complete it manually. We really strongly encourage parents and students to use the DRT whenever possible, whenever they're eligible. This will reduce their chances for being selected for verification. We can't use the phrase eliminate, because there are people who use the DRT that are still selected for verification, but it greatly reduces the chance that you're selected if the information that you placed on the form came directly from the IRS. So again, if the student's eligible to use the DRT, again, they have a chance here to proceed directly to there, or if they want to click no thanks and enter things manually, they can do so. If a student is going to answer it manually, then it's going to want to know what their adjusted gross income was for 2020. So they can type that information in there. Hopefully they'll have their W-2 or their W-2s or a copy of their tax form when they're answering these questions. Then it's going to want to know how much the student earned from work. And then if the student were married, they would be answering the question for how much they earned, the spouse earned as well, if it were a married student. And then they are going to be required to enter the amount of income tax paid. A lot of times for our students, if they earned, they may have filed a form, they may have been eligible for a full tax refund. So oftentimes for our students, they may have zero taxes paid for the year. And then here come the questions. If you were a tax filer, there's going to be these additional questions about combat pay, scholarships and grants, education credits, untaxed portions of IRAs, IRA deductions of payments, tax exempt interest income. Oftentimes for students, as Steve indicated, these fields come in as pre-populated with a zero, and the student only has to type in an answer if it's something other than zero. Lots of times for our students, this whole screen will be those pre-populated zeros, and they can click continue and move on. They are also going to ask those exemption from income type of questions. So the child support that a student may have paid out, earnings from a co-op education program, or taxable earnings from work study. Not as common in terms of work study for our students that are high school seniors. Once our students are in college, and if they're earning work study dollars, and that was part of their adjusted gross income, here's the opportunity on the form for them to indicate how much of that income from 2020 was from work study, and that will be subtracted from their adjusted gross income, so that that financial aid that they worked and earned does not count against their future financial aid. It's also going to ask about untaxed income for students, child support, housing allowances, payments to tax-deferred pensions, veterans benefits, other types of untaxed income, etc. I will just point out for the payments to tax-deferred pensions, since we're talking to a lot of folks who are working at school systems, this is, for students, oftentimes the answer is zero. Parents far more often have an answer to this question if they work for like a school district, a city, a state, government, the federal government. They're paying into tax-deferred retirement pensions. And so that question would have the amount that was paid in during 2020, and that information would be on the W-2. So not too often for students, but far more often for parents, depending on where they're employed. Then it's going to ask about the student assets. And again, we're moving to, instead of from 2020, we're moving to now as of today. So what would the student have available in cash, savings, or checking? Sometimes there's an answer to that. We see a lot of zeros for students. Net worth of investments in business and farm, oftentimes for students, those answers are zero. If there was a preparer, but hopefully you were not using a preparer to get this form completed. So we'll move on past that. And then they're going to get the message that you're not done, that you still have to submit your FAFSA form. So there is going to be a summary. The students will have an opportunity to review all the questions and all the answers before they sign and hit submit. So this is what the summary looks like that they'll see. So you can see it's each question plus what the answer is. So they should review these carefully to make sure that there are no mistakes on the form. So you can see that they get the opportunity to review the entire FAFSA, right, before they hit the submit button. So they'll see all these answers. If they did use the DRT, the questions about income that came over from the IRS, they will not see the actual numbers. They'll see the phrase transferred from the IRS. So while they can't look at those and verify them, they can assume that they are correct because they came directly from the IRS. So here's the opportunity, like I said, to review the student section of the FAFSA so they can see the whole summary. Once they have taken a look at the summary, they do need to read the agreement of terms and do the little checkbox that they agree to the terms of filing the FAFSA, and then they can move on to signatures. So, for example, that we have here that the student logged in and used their FSA ID, so they are considered as having signed the form. But in this case, this one still needs a parent signature. So you can click on the provide the parent signature option, and then you can let us know which parent that we are going to use the FSA ID to sign. So parent 1 or parent 2. And so there you can see the names and dates of birth and social security numbers to make sure that you select the right parent whose FSA ID you want to use to sign the form. And the parents also will be agreeing to the terms. You can enter the parent FSA ID, username and password, and click sign this form. And then you can see, well, this is a repeated slide, which parent are you, right? And then you're going to hit the submit button, and you're going to get a congratulations confirmation page. So this is really important. We would strongly suggest that you tell the students to print this page. This is confirmation that their form was done. It has the date and the time at the top. We will point out one feature on this confirmation page. If you are working with parents who may have multiple children who they need to complete a FAFSA for, there is an opportunity in the first half of the screen. You'll see a box that says, you have another child who needs to complete a FAFSA. And then it says transfer the FAFSA information. If you click on that, what that nicely does is conveniently moves all the parent information to a new FAFSA, and the second FAFSA that you need to complete will only need to have the information for the next student entered. So the parent information will automatically transfer. A lot of people miss this feature and end up typing all the information in if they're doing their FAFSA for 2 or 3 children. Also notice on the confirmation form, it tells you about graduation rates and retention rates and transfer rates for the colleges that the student listed on the form. Okay, so assuming we can get the FAFSA submitted, it's important, submission is a big thing, but in a sense, the FAFSA process is not over once you hit the submit button. Families can randomly be selected for a process called verification. So we're going to talk a little bit about that process. Roughly about 18% of people who file the FAFSA are selected for verification by the Department of Education. Families with the lowest expected family contributions, in other words, those that are most likely eligible for Pell Grants, will be selected at a much higher rate. Verification is really a process in which they're trying to verify the accuracy of the information that was submitted on the FAFSA. That's why people who use the DRT have a much less likely chance of being selected than those who have to type in all the answers manually. When students receive requests from their college for verification materials, they're going to need to respond to them in a timely manner. There are colleges that will set deadline dates to receive verification information. The tricky part when working with students is colleges will notify students in different ways. Some may send letters. Some may email the students. As you know, it's very common for the colleges now to give the students an email address or a username and password to log into a portal for that particular institution. So students are really going to have to stay on top of it. When you are looking at the student's student aid report, which is the document that will be provided to the student once their FAFSA is processed, if there is an asterisk next to the EFC on the student aid report, they have been selected for verification. The part that is not fun for our high school seniors is when they're applying to multiple colleges. If they've applied to 5 colleges and accepted everywhere and they were selected for verification, they're going to have to complete the verification 5 times, once for each college. And the process may not be the same. The forms may not look exactly alike. So the students definitely need some support through that process. Also, we have colleges out there that choose to do 100% verification for all students, whether they were selected by the federal government or not. So it is important to pay attention to that. One thing we want to bring to your attention is that you may have heard this summer that the Department of Education suspended verification. They did do that, but they suspended verification based on the conditions with the pandemic for the remainder of the 21-22 academic year. So students who were in college right now, currently this academic year, who may have filed the FAFSA and hadn't completed verification by July 13th, in most cases it has been suspended, and they did not and will not have to complete the verification process for this academic year. However, the Department of Education has not suspended verification for the 22-23 year. So your seniors that are completing the form, if they are selected for verification, they are very likely going to be hearing from their colleges at some point about the verification process and what the documentation will be required. We are hopeful that maybe the department will make the same decision again at some point to suspend verification, but that's not happened as of now. So students receiving information about completing the verification process for the 22-23 year will have to comply with those requests. If they're selected, oftentimes they'll have to do a verification worksheet. Many times colleges will have those worksheets loaded up on their website, and they'll simply have to download them and complete them. And then many of our colleges are using the process where students upload their verification documents back into a secure portal. The family may have to provide a copy of a federal tax return transcript or a signed copy of the federal tax return for the parents and students if they filed forms. If they did not file taxes, they may need to, both parents or students may need to submit their W-2s to verify the information. There is also, if they're selected for verification, they may need to provide a verification of non-filing letter. This will only have to come from the IRS for parents and for independent students who didn't file taxes. This is not needed for the dependent student. So a verification of non-filing letter will need to be secured from the IRS for either parents or independent students. There is a form 4506E that you could request the non-filing verification letter. It's by checking box 7 on that form. So parents or students who didn't, independent students who did not file will need to complete that process. All right, let's talk a little bit about special circumstances. We know with the pandemic, that is now like 19 months in its time frame. We have a lot of families in Ohio and across the country who have had changes in income. So we want to talk about special circumstances. When you file the FAFSA for next year, you'll be putting your 2020 income on the form. However, if their family has experienced a significant change in income, since the information on their 2020 tax return, they may have special circumstances that need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and they'll have to probably have some documentation to share with the financial aid office. Colleges geared up last year with the pandemic and are on high alert for these appeal cases coming in, knowing that there are significant losses of income for both the calendar year 2020 and families who are experiencing income losses for 2021. The types of special circumstances, again, loss of employment, loss of untaxed income or benefits such as child support. We know oftentimes child support ends when a student graduates or turns age 18. If there was something like a separation, a divorce, or a death after the FAFSA was submitted, so if something happens, if your student has filed their FAFSA already or files it soon and something occurs during this year in terms of a separation, a divorce, or a death, then that may be considered a special circumstance, and they're going to need to work with their colleges. So extraordinary dependent care, if you have a child with special needs, that may be considered a special circumstance. If there are highly unusual and uncovered medical and dental expenses, that could be another type of special circumstance. So, we strongly encourage you to talk to your families and, discover if there's been any change of income versus what was reported for the year 2020. And if so, we need to make sure that those families are working with the colleges to get the special circumstances made known to the college. Many college websites have a loss of income appeal form, or a special circumstances forms, or change of circumstances. They may call the forms different things, but in many cases, you may be able to go to the institution website, download those forms, get them completed and submitted so that the FAFSA can be considered for adjustments if any are necessary. Hopefully, we have gotten you through the process of filing the FAFSA and talking about verification in special circumstances. Now we'd like to make you aware of a lot of resources that are at your fingertips while you're serving students and families. What we have here for you is a screenshot from FAFSA Help Ohio and our counselor resource page on the OASPA website. We have lots and lots of things there for both you and resources for students and parents as they're working through the FAFSA. I'll remind you again that anytime during the year, you can send your financial aid questions to outreach@oaspa.org, and we will do our best to answer your questions. The resources for parents and students, here's a screenshot of that. You can click on links that will take you to federal student aid, information for student aid programs in Ohio, and a brand new web page that's been designed by the Ohio Department of Higher Education along as part of that FAFSA 22 initiative. There's a new website, It's For You. And so it contains lots and lots of resources for parents and students as they're working through this. Also, FAFSA Help Ohio maintains a calendar on the website of FAFSA events. If you are hosting a FAFSA completion workshop at your school, you are welcome to go to the FAFSA events page, fill out the little form. We will get you listed up on the calendar for the date and time of your event. You can let us know if it's an event that's open to the public or restricted to students from your particular school or school district. You can let us know if it's in person or virtual. The events will be loaded up on the calendar by date and then also by what county the event is being hosted in. So for people who are looking for things that may be geographically close to them, the calendar will help them identify that as well. You can also request a financial aid night presenter. Many of the financial aid night general information sessions have happened. Those happen a lot of times in the month of September, leading up to the opening of the FAFSA, but some of you may do a presentation in the spring, perhaps to your juniors. OASPA will try to help you find a financial aid night presenter. We have a form on the website that you can go in and fill out. You'll find this under the resources tab, and then there's a drop box there for counselors. One thing that we've also done that might be helpful to your families is we have recorded a general financial aid night presentation. So if you have a parent or student who wants to listen to general financial aid information, you can download that. There is a code associated with it, but it's right there on the webpage. We've had counselors reach out, am I allowed to put this in my newsletter with the information for my parents and students? The answer is absolutely yes. Share it as widely as can be. Some folks downloaded the presentation and played it as part of their financial aid night. For those that were not doing a lot of in-person, in-building kind of opportunities. So please use these resources. It's really important. We want to make sure that we can continuously reach out to you. So also on that counselor resource page, there's a place for you to go in and put yourself in our database so that anytime we do mailings about upcoming webinars, workshops, etc., you would be on that listserv. Another type of resource, we are recording this webinar today. Starting tomorrow, this webinar will be up on the counselor resource page. So if you feel the need to go back and refer to anything that we covered, if you want to share the information with a colleague who wasn't able to be with us today, you can let them know to go to the OASPA counselor resource page, and they will be able to listen to the webinar that was offered today. So those are our resources. We are happy to take any additional questions that you may have. I will open this up to Faith and Leanne and Kim to see if there are any questions that came in during the webinar that you feel like we should share with the entire audience. So if there's something, Leanne or Kim, please unmute and ask your question, and we'll share the answer with the entire audience.
Hi, this is Leanne. We did have a couple questions regarding dependency kind of appeal type situations, and I tried to address those in the chat, but I know that's a very complicated process, and I know it varies by school, but I was hoping maybe you could speak to it a little bit, just kind of about how that works when parents aren't involved or there is estrangement.
Yes, so oftentimes, and this goes back to this section also too, where Faith was talking about whether the screenshot that comes up that says you will or will not be able to provide parent information. If there is an extreme situation in which the student would not be able to share parent information, it could be as a result of estrangement. It could be as a result of the potential for physical harm between the parent and the students, could be abandonment, things like that. You may need to support the student in reaching out to the college, because what you're really attempting to do there is what would be referred to as a dependency appeal. One way to start the process would be to complete the FAFSA, indicate that you're not able to provide parent information, and the school finish the student section, the FAFSA will be submitted, it'll go to the schools that are listed there. As Faith indicated, the majority of schools will automatically reach out to any student whose FAFSA comes in under those conditions and ask for additional documentation to support the situation about why you were not able to provide parent information. So you may find a dependency appeal form on a website. You may need to respond to information that's sent directly to the student once they have completed the FAFSA and submitted it without parent information. Leanne, what other things should I add, or do you want to add to that, maybe based on what the questions were that came in?
I think you covered it. I just felt like I couldn't be as specific as I wanted to be in talking or in chatting in terms of the question and answer field. I think it's all about kind of communicating with the school or college that you're interested in. So no, you covered it. Great. And then there was one other question that I felt like I had a couple times in like different variations of the question in regard to a US citizen living out of the country. And yet, but all of the families are US citizens, they just live out of the country. So I had a couple questions regarding how that works from a FAFSA standpoint. Can they still complete the FAFSA? So I think I covered it in the chat, but if you have anything to add.
Well, why don't you go ahead and share how you answered it, and then we'll.
So I just indicated as long as if they are a US citizen, they can complete sign up for FSA ID and complete the FAFSA. They do have to convert the income from, in other words, if they don't pay taxes in the United States, they would have to convert the income to US dollars for the purposes of reporting it on the FAFSA. And that was about all I spoke to. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, and they may want to check directly with the college that they're applying to in terms of that, because one of the questions does ask your state of legal residence. And so depending on the circumstance, the state of legal residence, maybe the student never lived in the United States, but it probably is going to revert back to whatever is the last state that the parents were legal residents of. But that may need to be double checked with the college to see how they prefer the question be answered on the FAFSA.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yep, I'll go ahead and add, Morley, I had a question that I'm sure some of the others may have, and that is, if you would like a certificate of attendance for this webinar, if you will please email us at outreach@oasfa.org and let us know that you would like a certificate of attendance, we will generate one and email it back to you.
Yes, absolutely. We will be happy to do that so that you can use it as part of your professional development for renewing your certificates. So happy to do that. Are there any last questions that anyone would like to type in the Q&A box? Wait, I think we have a hand raised. Let's let's see. I saw a note about a hand raised, but I don't see that. Let's see. Any last questions? If not,
Worth repeating that we do not expect you all to be the experts in this. There are the four of us on here have done this for a while, and we still don't consider ourselves the experts. But we do welcome your emails at outreach@owasfa.org. We will get emails from counselors that will have very specific student questions, and we will answer them to the best of our ability, and we will tell you when the student needs to be referred to their financial aid office for information.
and I am typing that email address where you can send your questions. I just put it in the chat, so please feel free to send us any questions that you have. Someone asked if there's a link for the certificate. There's not a link. All you have to do is email us at outreach@owasfa.org and request a certificate of attendance and make sure that your full name is in your email, and we will do the certificates and email them back to you. If there are no final questions, thanks again for joining us today. A reminder that this webinar has been recorded and will be placed up on the counselor resource page on the OASFA website. We wish you the best during FAFSA season. We wish you lots and lots and lots of FAFSAs. Ohio and the rest of the country has some gain back to do to see if we can get back to pre-pandemic FAFSA filing levels. So good luck with FAFSAs this year. We hope your students get them done in a timely manner. And if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to answer your questions. Thank you.